Good morning, everyone, and welcome to World Bank Live. I'm Srimati Sridhar with the World Bank, and over the next half hour or so, we've got a great conversation for you on the role of governments and the state as they take the lead in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be asking what are the challenges and pressures governments are facing as they cope with the pandemic, and what can be done to help them function in these difficult times. Now, as they look to respond efficiently, they also face the added threat of corruption. With the pandemic requiring a massive response by governments, opportunities for corruption are on the rise. So how best can governments tackle corruption and ensure integrity in these tough times? Now to talk about this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Olowo-Okere. He is the Director of the Governance Global Practice here at the World Bank. Ed, welcome.
Thank you, Sri.
So Ed, let's kick things off. Take me back to the basics here as we talk about governments and their key role in responding to the pandemic on a global scale. It might be obvious to some, but let's put it on record. Why are governments so important right now, and how so?
Thanks, Sri. I think it all begins with the nature of the pandemic. The pandemic poses serious public health and safety issues. And as we have seen in the many hundreds of thousands of lives that have already been lost and millions of people that have been infected across the globe, governments really need to take emergency health response to save lives. And citizens do expect that from their governments. Okay, and as we are also seeing in many countries, the containment measures that have been introduced, like the lockdown, distancing, social distancing measures, shutdown of borders, these are really actions that can only be taken by a government. Now, when you look at some of the containment measures, they're also having some ripple effects on households, on businesses. Now, if you look at these ripple effects, then they also require response, some kind of economic response, and only governments are capable of doing that. Then on top of that, to be able to do all of this, respond, requires a lot of coordinations. Coordinations across levels of governments, coordinations within governments, and coordinations with citizens and with private sector actors. I mean, these are proportions that only governments are best placed to lead.
Absolutely. And all these things that you mentioned, these are all tall tasks, of course, but explain to us, why have some governments found it more difficult to respond?
Okay. I think let's begin with acknowledging one very important fact. This crisis is of an unimaginable proportion that many governments could hardly have foreseen this 12 months ago and prepared adequately in advance. With that taken, countries with weak public institutions, poor coordination practices within and across government levels, countries with poor level of preparedness for disasters generally, and also inadequate investments in technology and digital skills will struggle to respond in this kind of context. Now, if you look at some of the containment measures that have been undertaken, like the lockdown and social distancing, which I mentioned earlier on, they pose very serious challenges to state continuity in some jurisdiction. Now, let me give some example. So imagine, for instance, a government that now needs to adopt a certain level of remote working without the necessary infrastructure and procedures in place before the pandemic. Imagine, for instance, countries where their regulations require that files must still be carried from one office to another. Then imagine, for instance, the absence of government technology solutions, what we call GovTech, to run the core operations of government remotely and to deliver services to citizens and businesses. All of that will make a lot of countries to be unable to respond effectively. But in fragile and conflict and violence affected countries, then you have further complications in terms of weaker public institutions, weaker coordination across levels of government, security issues that might prevent access, and also poor infrastructure.
So, Ed, I'm glad you mentioned this because it seems to me from what you're saying that it's those countries that are in the greatest need that are going to have the toughest time keeping their governments functioning. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, unfortunately. Many fragile and conflict and violence affected countries, as well as low income countries, have found it more challenging to ensure state continuity in this period. Now, we have to imagine what the issues are. They face challenges in running the core operations of government. Earlier on, I mentioned that if you have to work remotely, how well were they prepared to do this? Okay, then how can you deliver services if you have to work remotely and you are not prepared for that? Then what about coordinations across levels of government if you didn't have good arrangement for that before? And also, when you then look at the lockdown and the challenges of working remotely, how do they develop and implement a comprehensive package of response to the crisis? So among other things, what you are then going to find is that countries that have made less investments in technology and digital skills, less investment in strengthening public institutions and systems, and have not focused on modernizing the public employment management, will have bigger challenges.
Great, Ed. So, hold on to these thoughts. Before we dive any deeper, I want to take a quick break here and welcome those of you online who have been listening in. If you're just joining us, welcome to World Bank Live. We're here with Ed Olowo-Akere. He is the director of the Governance Global Practice here at the World Bank. And we're talking about how we can reduce the risk of corruption during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the specific role that governments and the state are playing at this time. We see a lot of new folks tuning in, so a big welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. Just looking at our audience, we've got Isbeth from Peru, Milos from Serbia, Danielle from London, Wendy from Honduras, Clement from Zambia, Russell from Bangladesh, Kumrat from Indonesia, and Yvonne from Mexico. So hi guys, it's great to have you here with us, and we hope you're enjoying the program so far. Now, Ed, let's get back to our conversation here. We've talked a little bit about the role that governments play during a crisis like this pandemic. Some are obvious and some are less obvious, but now let's bring in the threat of corruption and unpack this a little bit further. On a basic level, if it isn't addressed, what is the impact of corruption on countries and their people?
Okay. Corruption can impact a country and its people in many ways. And we could probably spend the whole of today talking about that. But then, in the interest of time, let me kind of try to summarize. First, corruption can divert resources away from where they are most needed. So take, for example, in most of our client countries, we need more investments in health, in education, in infrastructure, and other development programs. Corruption will take resources away from that. Then corruption can also divert resources away from those who need the resources the most. So take, for example, the poor, and we still have millions of that in the world, the jobless, and we have millions more of that as well. Then we also have like the small and medium-term enterprises, okay, who could benefit from support from government, but corruption will take resources away from them. So what you then have is that corruption benefits a few people, okay, who then pocket the resources that belong to everyone. And the consequence of that is that you have increasing or widening inequality in any country that is having a lot of corruption. Now, we also have to know part of the impact of the corruption as well. Corruption will undermine trust in public institutions and in government generally. And that can render a government ineffective if there is lack of trust from the citizens, from the private sector. So to sum it up, corruption can prevent a country from achieving its full potential. So, and if I may say, corruption is evil.
Okay, Ed. So, let's now tie in what you're saying about corruption, specifically with the COVID-19 crisis that we're facing today. You recently wrote a blog about corruption risks. Folks can find it on our World Bank blogs platform about how the response to the pandemic raises the risks of corruption. You said, at its worst, corruption could lead to unnecessary suffering and even loss of lives by diverting scarce resources from the people and places who need them the most. Can you explain why that is and which areas are affected?
Okay. Yes, that is absolutely true. Okay. And let's go back again to the basics, and that is the nature of the pandemic. It requires speedy response from the government. Okay, in the process of providing that speedy response, then a lot of things can go wrong. And let us also not forget that in this environment of serious human crisis, there are those who also kind of see this as an opportunity to make money. Now, the standard checks and balances as they are designed for governments, they are not necessary for emergencies or for speedy response. So what you can have in a situation like this is that the checks and balances as they were originally designed can be skipped. Confusions may arise on oversight. For instance, as governments try to coordinate within and across levels of government, then it is also possible that in the process of wanting to do things speedily, that attention may not be paid to adequate documentation, adequate reporting. Now, we have to understand, nevertheless, that this is capable of undermining trust in government. I think I mentioned that earlier on. And in the context of this pandemic, if trust in government is already undermined, then corruption can generally render the government response and interventions ineffective. So let me maybe give some concrete example. So government may make interventions, for instance, like some containment measures like lockdown and so on and so forth. If it is possible to give bribes to law enforcement officials to be exempted from containment measures, then the expected result of containment or lockdown may not necessarily be achieved. Now, also imagine, for instance, that the funds that are meant to procure protective gears for health workers, that they are diverted. Then you have health workers being exposed unnecessarily. Now, we also have to, now, in terms of the areas that corruption affects, I think it's all aspects of government response, okay? So whether it is the health response. So if you take the health response, for instance, there could be corruption in the procurement of medical supplies, even in the distribution. There could also be corruption in the payment of salaries and allowances to health workers. Then let's go to another category of government response, like support to households. Okay, the money may not necessarily go to poor people or those who are the most vulnerable. It is possible that the cash could be diverted. Then also goods, foods, for instance, that are being procured for government to be distributed to households, the prices can be inflated. Okay. In terms of support to firms, also you can have government favoring certain sectors because of influence by some powerful individuals. So those are some of the areas.
Great, Ed. And I want to, talk about law enforcement, specifically. Would you say that emergency measures to restrict people's movements to stop the spread of the virus could actually heighten corruption?
Yes, unfortunately. Now, as we are seeing in many countries across the globe, law enforcement agencies have been asked to enforce the emergency measures. And the question is why? Okay, some people may not necessarily want to comply, and they may have reasons why they want to get an exception. Now, in some jurisdiction, that really provides opportunities for the law enforcers to ask for and receive bribes. And I'm not just imagining this. I'm sure there are people watching these live events that have heard about this or have experienced it firsthand.
Well, Ed, this is a quick, this is a good moment to take a quick break and welcome folks who may have just joined us. A huge welcome to everybody who's watching us from around the world. We're so happy to have you here with us. We're talking to Ed Olowo-Okere. He is the director of the Governance Global Practice here at the World Bank. And we're talking about the risks of corruption during the COVID-19 pandemic and the specific role governments and the state play during this crisis. Now, at this time, we have got Hisham from Egypt, Johanna from the Ivory Coast, Sierra from Gambia, Jean from Barbados, Anand from Laos, David from Germany, Dora from Dubai, and Melinda from Papua New Guinea. Guys, that's fantastic. Hi, and it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for saying hello, and we hope you're enjoying the program so far. And Ed, let's keep our conversation going. We've talked about the role governments play in this pandemic, as well as added pressures and challenges now with the risk of corruption. So let's start to look ahead a little bit. Huge government spending is vital in the response to COVID-19. So how do you think we ensure it continues, but also guard against corruption at the same time?
Okay, I think this is a very important question, and it is important to ensure that the government programs and spending continues and they are effective and achieve the desired results. Now, I think what government should do is first to recognize explicitly the risk of corruption. As I said earlier on, there are people who see this as an opportunity to make money. Okay, so that's a fact of life. Now, government should then assess the risk of corruption upfront and look at each of the different categories of their response, whether it is the health response, the support to household or support to firms, and see what are the risks of corruption and also put in place adequate mitigation measures to be able to address that. Then there are also some other important things. I think government should really deal with corruption issues promptly. Because corruption will still occur. So deal with it promptly and be very transparent about what the cases of corruption are and how they are dealing with it. Then more generally, government should also strengthen accountability measures. Okay, there are some of these like ex post audits, reporting, oversight arrangements, and so on and so forth. Then also, government should really ensure and enhance transparency very broadly, okay, including direct links to citizens and to NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They should give them access to information and respond to queries that they may have. So if I may just state one important principle to conclude on this question, government should really be very generous with information, okay, on their response program and on the spending and how they are dealing with corruption. That's very critical.
So, Ed, let's keep this going, with this next question now. What can be done to help countries and governments? Is it about financial support or is it about technical advice?
Okay, so financial support is very important, okay? And many countries obviously need that. Also, let's face the fact we are a bank, and it is one of the things that we provide to client countries. But more importantly, we also offer superb technical assistance with our global expertise, and our clients appreciate that a lot. Also, given our global reach, we, the bank, are able to identify and share best practices across countries. And that is really a very important aspect of supporting countries to respond.
Absolutely, Ed. And I think this sort of segues very nicely into my last question, which is, as some countries now begin to relax restrictions, there's a new focus on how we can build back better and invest in more resilient systems. Now, is this true for the areas we've been talking about today? And if so, how?
I would say yes. And I would also like to state that when we talk about building back better, we should not just look at this in terms of building hard infrastructure. I think this is also about building back better institutions and systems. So if you look at, for instance, the multiple shocks that governments are experiencing as a result of this pandemic, whether it is the health shock, the economic or fiscal shocks, This will provide great impetus for fundamental changes in governance. Now, to build back better, to address your question on the how, to build back better, governments will really be seeking answers to questions in 5 broad areas. So, that is among other things that they may want to focus on. So one and most important is, how should the role of government change in delivering public services going forward? Okay, how should the role of government in managing the economy and facilitating private sector activities, how should that look like? What should be, for instance, the extent and role of government in ownership of companies? Then another question is, and the second one is, how should government conduct its operations and deliver public services going forward? And this bringing the issue of digital GovTech solutions. Okay, to what extent do they deploy GovTech solutions to manage their core operations and to deliver services? Then a third question, how should government improve public sector productivity? And this is going to be critically important, especially given the fiscal challenges that countries are facing. So that's really something that countries also need to focus on. So a fourth area that government should also focus on is, how can citizens' trust in government be enhanced? Because as I said earlier on, if trust in government and public institutions are undermined, then it can render ineffective any response that government may be making. Okay, so ensuring trust in government from the citizens is really very important. So how will the government use communication, various technology tools, engagement with different stakeholders to be able to enhance citizens' trust in government? And then a final area of question is, how can governments be ready for future crises? Let's not miss the fact that there will be another crisis. So governments needs to be prepared. Okay, so in terms of, and governments to take into consideration, for instance, the experience they are having with this based on citizens' demands and so on and so forth. So they should then be able to be better prepared for future crises. So those are some of the areas that I think the government should focus on in terms of building better. This is in addition to infrastructure and other things that governments are having to think about at this time.
Absolutely, Ed. And, these are all really excellent questions. Folks, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank again my guest for this morning, Ed Olowo-Okere. He is the director of the Governance Global Practice here at the World Bank. Ed, it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sri. Thank you, and thanks to the audience.
Now, folks, the conversation doesn't stop here. To catch a recap of all our coronavirus-related discussions we've had so far, head on over to live.worldbank.org. And to learn more about what the World Bank is doing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, be sure to check out our website. It's worldbank.org/coronavirus. Thank you again so much for joining us this morning. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.